Welcome, Wargamers, to a new kind of series that I am going to be doing called Why You Should Play. Now, essentially, I do lots of different kinds of videos on the channel. I do Star Collecting Box reviews, I do lore videos, painting stuff where we just kind of hang out. But I wanted to do a new type of video series that is really meant to answer a single question. Why should I play X faction? And that can sometimes be a complicated one to answer because there are so many things involved in choosing an army that's just right for you. Not just lore, but aesthetics and how easy they are to collect or how they play. And so that's what I wanted to do this for. So every episode in this series is going to take a look at a faction, not just from the gameplay perspective or the lore or the modeling, but kind of give you a sample of all of those things in one. High level points. What is this faction about? Why would you want to play it? And so I broke it down into the three big pillars of the hobby. Lore, hobby, lowercase hobby, meaning building, painting, those kinds of things, collecting, if you're someone who likes to just collect everything, but then also gameplay. And I'm going to say up front, if none of those three things interest you about a faction, you should probably pass on them, and we'll find something right for you. But if you are interested in any of these three things, you might want to play Soulblight Gravelords, which is the subject of today's video. So without further ado, let's jump into the lore behind the Soulblight Gravelords. The Soulblight Gravelords represent the dark minions of Nagash, the god of undeath, creations that were brought into the mortal realms by his own hand. Nagash actually raised two characters from the old world, Neferatya and Manfred, and these were the progenitors of the vampires, aka the Soulblight. Vampirism, if you're not familiar, is the common name for the Soulblight curse. And since their introduction into the setting in the Age of Myth, the Soulblight as a race of creatures have proliferated the mortal realms. From long lineages and dynasties and hierarchies and political dealings, they can look however you want them to. Noble houses that care for the people that they govern, satiating their needs only when they have to, or feral, crazed killers who do whatever they want, and basically they don't want to answer to anyone save their sire. And while vampires certainly are the main characters, it seems, the book is named after them and their pictures on the cover, they are far from all that this book has to offer. See, while Soulblight vampires are powerful, they are not very numerous in terms of fielding large armies of pure vampires. So in a setting of titanic battles with thousands upon thousands of combatants, an army is needed. And this to me is where the real, thematic heart of the faction lies. It's a flood of mindless undead servants bound by the will of their necromantic lords. Small groups of vampires using their sheer willpower to animate and lead these deathly hordes. You got zombies, skeleton warriors, necromancer servants, undead wolves, knights on skeletal steeds. I can't list them all, but there's a ton of stuff out there to help supplement these guys. But here in the lore section, what's really important to stress is that if you have a vision for an undead army, you can make it with this book, right? If you wanted a city that was extinguished by chaos magics in one fell swoop, you can do that, right? Have your zombies be the citizens of the city, your skeleton warriors be the city guard, maybe the White King was their former king or general, and so on. You could also have your troops, swear fealty to one of the progenitors of your kind and work directly as a servant of Manfred or Neferata within their legions. Those are the legions of night and the legions of blood, respectively. The vibe that comes from this book is that you represent a coven of Soulblight vampires all trying to show off to one another, right? Using the bodies of the dead as chess pieces in a greater game. Contrasting the regal nature of their aristocracy with the horrific gore and murder that makes such a thing possible. Now, I do have a full lore series going into the lore behind the various factions, but this is my high-level pitch, is that if you are interested in having a incredibly dynamic and insanely cool-looking set of heroes, and then, a bunch of mindless horrors that they represent, shuffling those into battle, and all of a sudden you have, leaders at the top who are absolutely valuable, but everything else is just chaff. They don't care about anything else that they work with. This is the kind of army for you, because narratively, that is an incredible amount of fun. In fact, one of the best things about these kinds of armies is that if you're somebody who wants to create lore for your faction, but you don't have maybe the time or the energy to go through and like have a story behind every single unit, this is perfect because maybe you have like 6 characters that you have to like come up with names for, but the rest of it, they could not care less about them, so you don't have to either. It's a faction that combines like dark themes of death and mortality and rot and all these kinds of things, but also balances it with the like regal nobility. So if you're like somebody who likes playing in that duality, the lore is for you. Now in the hobby section, this army has a lot going for it when it comes to the actual like nuts and bolts of our hobby, meaning models and paints and all those kinds of things. First off, this faction was recently buffed up with a number of fantastic new kits, right? You have new skeletons and zombies, but also a swath of new heroes and beasts that will add to your faction. Each of these looks absolutely terrific, and the undead look sufficiently rotted and falling apart, whereas the heroes look incredibly clean and audacious, as you would expect. You can, if you want, also bring Nagash into the army for even more fun, and to take up a whole lot of points if you're shy on models. Because that's something else I want to touch on. If you hate playing Horde armies, think very carefully about buying into this faction. We're in the hobby section, this is where it comes to collecting and that kind of stuff. If you want to keep your numbers limited, the whole like vibe of this is just a few core heroes and then a ton of expendable dudes. They love using mobs of skeletons and zombies to snag objectives and clog the enemy up. So in general, if you are someone from the hobby perspective who is a little bit put off by painting a lot of models, that's something you have to know before you jump in here. Now that, of course, being said, there are other ways to play this faction, like focusing on Blood Knights, which is their like extremely elite cavalry type army. And I'll be honest, I haven't played against that list yet, but if you want a super low model count army with some of the best sculpts that GW has to offer, boom, there it is. Because man, we got some great looking Blood Knights. Now, as far as building and painting them up, building has gotten a lot better since the last zombie and skeleton kits. I'm going to be honest with you, I hated those things so much. These go together very smoothly. I helped a buddy assemble some at my local store. I had no problems. The skeletons basically are near snap fit, but the zombies go together pretty well as well. But when it comes to painting, that's a bit more of an interesting topic for the Soulblight Gravelords, because they are a faction that you can put in as much work as you want to, and it will always look good, right? You want to prime those skeletons with Wraithbone and then wash it with Agrax Earthshade? Sure. If you just pick out some weapon bits, maybe some cloth, they're going to look awesome afterwards. Like, you're good to go. Are you bad at painting faces? Good news. Most of the models in their range don't have discernible faces because it's just like a skull or something. In fact, one thing that I love about the model range is that it really is a mix of different textures that are all very easy to paint. We already covered bone, but there's also like cloth, fur, wood, all of those things are very, very simple, barring weapons and shields, which you could just do silver if you really don't like to paint. So if you're somebody who painting is just not your jam, that's totally fine, because there's a lot of ways you can just easily crank out an entire army of these guys with washes and pick out some minor details afterwards. In the case of direwolves and vargheists, you can just dry brush until your heart's content. On the flip side, if you love painting, there is an immense amount of detail there on these models if you take the time to pick it out. You could have a model that is done as quickly and simply as possible next to one that you put a lot of time with, and they will both look good. They might not look coherent, meaning like depending on the colors you chose and all that kind of stuff, but they will both look individually quite good. Now, if this is your first faction for AOS, first off, welcome. I'd highly caution you not to worry about getting every single detail painted on your models, because some of them, like the new zombie kit specifically, have an immense amount of detail and bits and bobs and all these little things on them feel free to leave those primed and come back to them later, okay? Because don't get swallowed up into the weeds. No one cares that zombie number 36's wristwatch doesn't have a clearly visible set of hands indicating the time, right? Too many hobbyists get way bogged down in details. It's not the micro with this army, it's the macro. For those of you who don't know, my go-to measurement for painting quality is called 3 foot fabulous, where if you're holding a model up and you're painting it, you can notice all the little imperfections on it and it looks terrible and you're like, man, I suck at this. But the second you go to play a game and you put it on the table and you stand 3 feet back, which if you're playing a normal war game table, when your models are moving on the battlefield, they're about 3 feet away from you. You can't see it, right? It's unimportant unless you want to win a competition. Those little imperfections, they blur into nothing, and all of a sudden, everything looks fantastic. And the reason I bring that up is because this army, like some others, when it's fully painted, it just captures people, right? Some factions, when they're all done up and based together, just have that special X factor. People are going to walk by, they're going to see huge dragons and zombies and zombie carts and all this stuff and a bunch of incredible looking vampires. And it just hooks people. For real, a well done Gravelords army is a thing to behold because it's one of those factions that's greater than the sum of its parts, right? Like when it's all together, no matter how much work you put into it, if it's all painted, if you went with just washes or you went heavy on the detail, it just looks awesome. I would say other armies like Tyranids, for example, is another one where it's the same thing, but like it's just a thing to behold when there's that many models because they tend to be more of a horde faction, just there looking good. Now, I'll be super honest with you, I am far from an expert on gaming. I plan to start every single one of these sections with that, but there are a few things that I think make Soulblight Gravelords a truly awesome and unique faction. The first one is summoning. You see, they don't summon like, say, the Chaos factions, where you accrue like a certain, value or point system, and then you can spend that to bring units on. They do so in a way that is very acute with the lore, okay? When you set up a game and you're playing Soulblight Gravelords, you get 4 gravesite markers. Over the course of the game, you can summon your undead minions from these markers. Units that were destroyed can be brought back, some can be healed, and some of the flavorful sub-factions in the book allow you to use them in new and unique ways. The single most important thing to me when it comes to gaming is I ask the question, do they play like I imagined they would? Right? When you buy a battle tome, more than 50% of that book is lore. If the rules for using them do not reflect that lore, what was the point of it? Okay, and that's my honest opinion. That's how I evaluate how good a faction is in terms of gaming. Fortunately, I think the Soulblight Gravelords do a fantastic job bringing their themes to the table. The dynasties in the book add an incredible amount of flavor to the army. The gravesite markers allow you to lead his minions and keep bringing back more and more of the undead. While it's your heroes, these incredibly strong demigods of death that tend to do a lot of the killing blows. Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, check him out, get used to that war scroll, it'll be your favorite very soon. The power disparity between, chumps like zombies, for example, and the powerhouses that are the Vampire Lords feels right? That vampire could not care less about all these zombies getting mulched. They just swoop in for the kill and the glory points. Now, one thing I do want to stress that's very important in this portion of the video are keywords. You have to learn them, okay? This is an army where you take some absolutely garbage profiles on some of your units, like zombies are just not great on paper, but you can make them scary through buffs and aura abilities and spells and so on, and nearly all of those things are dictated by keywords. Words like summonable and vampire are extremely important. I look to the Vargeists for a perfect example. It's easy to look at them and be like, oh, these are highly mobile elite infantry. And they are, and that's totally true. But if you look at their keyword, they are vampires. And that keyword opens up a myriad of buffs and effects that they would not have otherwise. It makes them so much more than just a 3-man infantry unit. So don't fall for the mistake of thinking, oh, only my heroes are vampires. Nope, you have to look at all the different keywords. All in all, this faction seems to be dominated by playstyles that focus on the objectives or the battle plan mission parameters. So like summoning hordes of dudes to pin the enemy or hold them back, but specifically hold them back or sit on an objective so your opponent has to grind through them. You can then use your heavy hitters, your buffed up vampires or monsters, to take out any major threats. Just ask yourself, who actually has the potential to clear me off objectives? That's what I need to hit. Now, of course, there's a myriad of ways to play every single army, but I think that's a fair assessment of what you can expect if you were to walk up to a Soulblight Gravelords player at an event or a game night, and so I just think that's pretty reasonable. And friends, that is the Soulblight Gravelords. That's why you should play them, because they have incredible lore, awesome models that are just breathtaking, and they do some very interesting things on the battlefield that I think that you will enjoy. Let me know what army you want covered next in the comments down below. If you see that someone has already put it up there, just give them a thumbs up and upvote. Whatever one has the most upvotes, I will go ahead and do that next. Let me know your thoughts on the faction as well, and I will pin the most useful opinions and ways to get started and that kind of stuff to the top as always. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming.